The Soviet-Afghan War began in December 1979 when the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan. The conflict's roots lay in the internal political turmoil of Afghanistan. In 1978, a communist coup by the People's Democratic Party of Afghanistan (PDPA) overthrew the existing government, leading to widespread resistance from traditional, religious, and tribal groups. The PDPA implemented radical reforms, including land redistribution and secular policies, which alienated many Afghans. The unrest escalated into rebellion, prompting the Soviet Union to intervene to support the PDPA regime and protect its geopolitical interests. On 24 December 1979, Soviet troops entered Afghanistan under the pretext of upholding the 1978 Soviet-Afghan Treaty of Friendship. The Soviets' initial goal was to stabilize the PDPA government, led by Babrak Karmal, after ousting Hafizullah Amin, who was seen as a liability. The invasion marked the beginning of a decade-long war. Approximately 100,000 Soviet troops were deployed at the peak of the conflict, supported by tanks, helicopters, and advanced weaponry. The Soviet invasion faced fierce resistance from Afghan fighters known as the Mujahideen. These groups were diverse, consisting of tribal militias, religious leaders, and nationalist factions united by a common goal: expelling foreign occupiers. The Mujahideen's guerrilla tactics, knowledge of the rugged terrain, and strong local support made them formidable adversaries. They used ambushes, hit-and-run attacks, and sabotage to challenge the Soviet forces. The Soviet-Afghan War became a proxy conflict during the Cold War. The United States, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, and China supported the Mujahideen with weapons, funding, and training. The CIA's Operation Cyclone channeled billions of dollars to arm the resistance, including Stinger missiles that significantly countered Soviet air superiority. Pakistan's Inter-Services Intelligence (ISI) played a crucial role in training and coordinating Mujahideen forces. The war had devastating effects on Afghan civilians. Bombing campaigns, landmines, and ground battles led to massive destruction and loss of life. Over 1 million Afghans were killed, and millions more were displaced. An estimated 6 million refugees fled to neighboring Pakistan and Iran, creating one of the world's largest refugee crises. The social fabric of Afghanistan was torn apart, with families separated and livelihoods destroyed. The Soviet military employed conventional warfare tactics, including airstrikes, armored assaults, and occupation of key urban centers. However, their strategies were ill-suited to countering the Mujahideen's guerrilla warfare. The rugged terrain of Afghanistan's mountains and valleys provided natural strongholds for the resistance. Additionally, the Soviets faced logistical challenges, poor morale among troops, and mounting casualties, which eroded domestic support for the war. The Mujahideen's success stemmed from their ability to adapt and their unwavering determination. With external aid, they acquired modern weaponry, including anti-aircraft missiles that neutralized Soviet helicopters and jets. Their deep-rooted knowledge of Afghanistan's geography allowed them to evade capture and launch surprise attacks. The resistance was also fueled by religious fervor, as the war was framed as a jihad against an atheist invader. By the mid-1980s, the Soviet leadership, under Mikhail Gorbachev, recognized the war's unsustainable nature. Gorbachev referred to Afghanistan as a bleeding wound and sought to extricate the Soviet Union from the conflict. In 1986, he initiated a policy of national reconciliation in Afghanistan, aiming to negotiate a political settlement while gradually reducing Soviet troop presence. In 1988, the Soviet Union, Afghanistan, the United States, and Pakistan signed the Geneva Accords, a series of agreements aimed at ending the war. The accords included provisions for Soviet troop withdrawal and the cessation of external aid to both sides. Despite the agreements, the civil war in Afghanistan continued after the Soviets' departure as the Mujahideen refused to negotiate with the PDPA government. The Soviet withdrawal began in May 1988 and was completed by 15 February 1989. The retreat was conducted in an orderly manner, with Soviet forces successfully avoiding major losses during their departure. The withdrawal marked the end of direct Soviet involvement, but Afghanistan remained embroiled in conflict. The PDPA government, led by President Mohammad Najibullah, managed to hold power for several years but eventually collapsed in 1992. The war left Afghanistan in ruins. Infrastructure was destroyed, the economy was crippled, and millions of Afghans continued to live as refugees. The power vacuum created by the Soviet withdrawal and the collapse of the PDPA government led to a protracted civil war among Mujahideen factions. This chaos eventually paved the way for the rise of the Taliban in the mid-1990s. The Soviet-Afghan War had far-reaching consequences for the Soviet Union. It drained economic resources, caused significant military casualties, approximately 15,000 Soviet soldiers died, and damaged the Soviet Union's international reputation. The war contributed to domestic discontent and weakened the Soviet state, accelerating its eventual collapse in 1991. The conflict also reshaped global geopolitics, influencing US-Soviet relations and the dynamics of the Cold War. The Soviet-Afghan War remains a pivotal chapter in modern history, symbolizing the dangers of foreign intervention and the resilience of a nation's people. The conflict's legacy continues to shape Afghanistan's trajectory and offers lessons about the complexities of war, geopolitics, and cultural resistance.